You know, Jeff, I do always think that AI is going to be the quarter in the jar type of word, but tariff came out like really early today, you guys. I really hope that's not it, because it's just going to make everybody upset, honestly. But let's start with some quick introductions.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Campbell. I work at Wayfair. I've been there for a little over 4 years. My team leads paid social on Meta and also app marketing. Kick it over to Ro.
Hi, everybody. I'm Roshan Varma. I'm SVP of Digital at Delta Galil. For those of you who haven't heard of it, Delta Galil is an apparel company specializing in intimates and denim. We partner with some of the world's largest brands like Ralph Lauren and Skims to manufacture their products or license their products. We also own retail brands such as 7 for All Mankind, Splendid, Bare Necessities, PJ Salvage, and others.
All right, Ro, Daniel, let's start off with a softball one for you guys. Why have a test and learn program?
I mean, I think if you want to get insights, you have to have a test and learn program. Like what we were saying, if you have a hypothesis, you might believe strongly, but when you actually test it, you might see the opposite. So I think having that test and learn program is really key to listening to insights and learning from the customers rather than just learning from your own hypothesis, your own internal belief. Like, we know that we might be biased, we might not represent what the actual customer sees, so I think testing and getting that data is really crucial.
So I actually think that the tests are the least important part of a test and learn program. Because I really think what's important to have this program is the cultural change it can create in an organization. Retail organizations, like it's Monday. I think we all know what everyone does on a retail Monday. The same damn things we've done for the last 20 years. You've got the junior people preparing reports. Who knows if they even know what's in the numbers they're talking about that they submit to the leadership team Monday afternoon. What I believe a good test and learn program can do is instill a culture of innovation throughout an organization where all members of an organization are trying to think of new ways to do things, new ways to engage with our customers. And it encourages a cross-functional relationship, and it enables teams to be okay with doing things that might not work. And I actually think that's sometimes even more important than the tactical insights and data that you gain along the way.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. The way that I like to look at it is you win or you learn. If a test doesn't work, you learn along the way. Like, you're still getting valuable insights out of that, and I think that cultural environment is key to that. I think having that so that people feel okay knowing that a test might not work, but you'll still get something that you can take and learn from.
I mean, what was it we heard just now earlier about like ideas or insights for ideas? There's a lot of hippo in the room coming up with this is what we should do based off of an idea that they have. Instilling test and learn has the ability to change an organization to actually have data-driven decision-making, much more so than it would if you're just letting the highest paid person decide what direction to take.
So, Ro, it's about the cultural elements that come with the test and learn program. And so when you are dealing with those cross-functional stakeholders, when you are dealing with the hippos in the room, how do you determine what ideas are worth testing and what's just a bad idea?
By the way, do people know when I say hippo, I don't mean the jungle animal? Okay. That's half the struggle, people actually knowing what I'm talking about. So I use a framework called RICE. Maybe I'm just hungry. But so R for reach. How do you create a test that's actually going to reach a lot of people? I for impact. Let's only test something if you think it's going to matter. What's after? C, how confident are you going to be in the results? And then E, level of effort. So you kind of balance those elements. First, you try to create a list of ideas throughout the organization. Use that rubric to try to gauge what to prioritize. If a couple things win there, then you start getting after it.
Daniel, you talked about how sometimes when tests fail, it gives the best insights. Can you share an example of when you went into a test thinking it's definitely going to be this answer and you were just totally wrong?
Yeah, we recently did an incrementality test on the Meta program, and I think going into it, we thought this would just validate our multi-touch attribution model. We put a ton of effort into, maybe we have one going on existing customers, one going on net new customers. We can have 2 tests running at a time. If we're testing something that is a full channel strategy, maybe we're changing how we're optimizing, maybe we're trying to optimize towards first-party data instead of third-party data, then that might be a test that we run across a full channel. So I think it does depend a little bit on the dimension that you're measuring, but I think there's ways that you can segment your audiences and segment your campaign structure so that you can get multiple learnings in a specific period.
It's actually a debate I have with some of the math nerds that I work with. Am I allowed to say that? Sorry.
Do they like to be called math nerds? I'm sure you went over a lot of folks with that.
I'm not here to win friends. Back to the reality show. So you can segment customers. Potentially, you don't have to. I think there's what's called a multi-armed bandit that you can start running, even on the same kind of cohort of customers. If there's a variety of experiences, is that combination of experiences that might generate a good outcome. And as long as you're able to measure that combination of experiences that a customer segment's getting, and you get enough customers in there to get the statistical significance that you can get a read of it, I think you're able to get a read on that combination as opposed to doing one at a time. Because at the end of the day, the idea of the straight funnel is old dead. Customers are engaging with your brand in multiple ways and through multiple touch points. So if the customer's going to engage that way, the idea of a linear test is kind of silly anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a good call, especially if you're thinking of these combined experiences. If you might have 2 different variables, but ultimately you care about the combination, like that's what the customer is ultimately experiencing. So you care more about how do these 2 variables work together than independently. If you do it separately, you might get learnings on one and then the other, but together they might not work as well as
what's the creative they saw that comes to what landing page, that comes to what product, and that combination of things is where you might be able to find the magic.
Yeah.
Let's stick with this through line of the variables, which there are dozens within retail, right? When we think about seasonality and promotions that just skew customer data, like how do you structure tests to be as clean as possible? Because we all know in this room, like there's no such thing as clean data. So like how do you get the best possible answers given all the variables in play?
Speaking of ways I've lost friends, who's been in an organization and you asked about some capability and you're like, oh yeah, we tested it. And he said, oh, that's interesting. How'd you test it? They said, well, we didn't have something, and then we turned it on, and then it had bad results, so we turned it off. And it's like, oh, so you turned it on for Black Friday, or you turned it on for your lull in the summer season, or vice versa, whatever it is. And then I said, well, you're an idiot. Let's do it differently. In somewhat nicer terms, but not always. So how do you fix that? You have to run like good experiments. Generally, pre-post isn't going to be a good experiment, so don't let it have seasonality affect you. Try to have it as much of like an A/B type style as possible, so you're not dealing with seasonality or pricing and promotions changes. Get enough large sample size such that you're not kind of biasing user groups as much possible, and then even afterwards, dig into it. Like, did you by accident send all of your visitors in one group to a different product page or different site, different area of the store? Did your media partner accidentally like put all of the media weighting into a different region? Look into those things after the fact to see, okay, we tried to be random, but were we accidentally unrandom? And then adjust afterwards. And sometimes you got to throw out a test that was constructed with the best intentions.
Yeah, no, I think you said that well. I think you definitely want to look at bias. Like even if you do a randomized geo test, for example, there's probably going to be some pre-test bias between the groups. So making sure that it was as random as possible and that that's effective is, I think, key here. Another thing that we will do at Wayfair is we try to get as many learnings in as we can in the summer going into Q3 so that in Q4 we have a great sort of setup that we can apply through the peak holiday season and hopefully avoid running major tests during like a cyber period where we know that the data will be a little skewed.
Yeah, Ro, I have to pick on you. You're not actually running tests during Black Friday, are you? Like, are you a masochist? Like, what are you doing?
I mean, don't make fun of my hobbies.
Well, how long do you guys keep these tests up? Like, when do you know that you're like, okay, yeah, I have enough data to feel confident that this is the way that we should go? And don't tell me it depends. It does depend. What does it depend on?
If my variant's winning, we can end the test early. No, so look, you try to balance velocity with confidence, or statistical confidence. And I tell my team that I want to be confidently fast.
Yeah, I think if it's something that you feel very confident in, your hypothesis was, if it's like a no-brainer, I think you might not need to hit stat sig. Like I think there's a big focus on stat sig, but not for every test you might not need to hit that. If you're seeing consistently positive results across all of your KPIs after like 2-3 weeks on a test that you feel very confident in, it might make sense to just roll that out and move on so that you can get more learnings in and not feel like you're sort of wasting time proving out something that you already knew was going to work.
So when you get those learnings, Daniel, do you just flip it on to 100% of traffic or 100% of audiences, or how do you roll that out strategically across kind of the full gamut?
Yeah, I would say we do try to scale things as fast as we can, especially if we got a strong learning that, okay, this strategy works really well, then obviously we want it to reach as many customers as we can. One strategy that we try to make that scaling more effective is when we test these strategies, we might apply them across broader groups of audiences. So rather than segmenting down to just like a small segment, we might try capturing bits of different audiences or different ad types to make sure that it does work effectively across the channel. I guess that might contradict what I said earlier, like segmenting audiences. So you have to be sort of conscious about how you're planning out your roadmap, but I think there's ways that you can test in a way that makes you feel confident before you scale it up.
Yeah. So let's talk about the results and the measurement. We all live in an omni-channel world, right? Customers are shopping in multiple different ways. How are you thinking about attributing in-store impact for digital tests?
Yeah, my title has digital in it, but like I love stores. I've worked with omnichannel retailers my entire career. Love going into stores. I think the store associates can be the most valuable aspect of any brand. And even I like to say that we try to mirror our digital experience to be like your most effective, engaging, personable, and knowledgeable store associate. I think it's a myth that like digital should only drive digital, the same way as that when we're running TV ads, we're not expecting anyone to buy something on their TV. So like I kind of like reject the question because of course anything that you do on a digital channel will affect customer touch points, whether they buy on a phone, on a computer, via a QVC helpline, via your own stores, via retail partner stores.
Yeah, Wayfair currently only has one store, so it's much simpler for
really
us.
Easy.
Yeah, very easy. What we will do is we can look in the area around the store, which is in the Chicago area. We can see if there's been a halo impact on store sales or vice versa. If we're trying something new in the store, we can see how that impacted digital sales. And we generally have seen a halo impact of opening that store. We've seen more digital sales come from the area. So there's definitely like a connection there between the two.
Hey, you're opening another Wayfair store literally right in my backyard in Atlanta, too.
Yeah, there's, I think, 3 more coming, so
Yeah.
very exciting.
So, Ro, you talked about test and learn plans being an element of culture, right? Team building aspect. When you have all those cooks in the kitchen, like how do you just ensure alignment across merchandising and marketing and product and digital and in-store? Like, what does that look like?
Arm wrestling. That's why the biceps. It gets back to a little bit of having a part of the data-driven culture, so it isn't a cult of personality that's aligning from it. First, it's acknowledging that all parties need the other party to be successful. Your media manager needs their creative partner to create the assets and needs the their finance partner to approve the budget for it. So I think it's starting to, I don't think there's a concrete answer for how do you gain alignment other than it's a skill that organizations need to gain as they're moving forward. It's not really an answer, I'm sorry, but like, it's kind of like, just do it. I don't know.
I mean, so much of it is people-based, right? Like, your math nerds are just hard to rank online, I'm sure.
How dare you? Now you're being insulted.
Yeah, it's definitely people skill. I think this is where the RICE prioritization comes into. If you can point to, here's why we think that this idea will be more impactful because it has this reach, we think it will have this impact, we feel this confident in it. It's a lot easier to point to those numbers, so it's a little bit less personal and a little bit more data-driven. So I think that's crucial. I think having a strong roadmap so that you can present, here's what we will test and when, here's how we're thinking about prioritization ahead of time is also helpful. We think about things through a planning cycle, so every 6 months we're planning ahead for our test and learn agenda, and we will communicate with our product teams, our tech teams, merch teams to get alignment across all those variables so that when you're halfway through, 3 months in, if someone comes to you and is saying, why aren't you testing this? You can point back to, hey, we had this discussion, here's our roadmap, here's the prioritization. So I think that sort of documentation is also helpful to get alignment across the teams.
And it's about not just testing to test. Like, you know, I mentioned the 5 pillars that we think about, but ideally, there's corporate goals that the organization wants to achieve that have historically been set above my pay grade level. Then if you're developing your test and learn priority idea list, are you actually creating things that ladder up to the overall organization goals, as opposed to just thinking of like, oh, this is a nifty thing to learn?
Okay, last question from me before I release you to the wolves. What was the most surprising test that you've run recently?
I guess I can go. Other than the one I mentioned earlier with incrementality, another test that we ran recently was applying sort of more graphic overlays on our product ads on social. And what we did was we added dynamic parameters for different products. So like the price, we had strike-through price, we had star ratings, and really trying to make these images more exciting for customers. What we saw was that engagement actually went down, which was very surprising. We thought, okay, we're adding all this fun stuff to the images, like people are going to engage with it. I think what we found is that when we have price and star rating and all this information, people are shopping more like in the carousels on social and maybe not clicking through as much. And so that was just like a difference in what we expected. I think we had good takeaways from that, that there's ways we can modify what we're including. Maybe we don't want to put price on there. Maybe we do want to have star ratings so that people feel more confident in what they're purchasing. But like we said, we might not always know what the customer is going to react when we change things about the channel.
Yeah, not super interesting, or recent, but I think super interesting because of how cross-functional and surprising the results were. So I was working with an apparel brand that made products in various like fits, and basically like from comfortable to standard to slim, extra slim, super slim, like blah blah. And you know, general merchandising says the wider your assortment, the closer you get to customer, the better it should be. But we were wondering if customers were getting, we looked at the data, we said that people were like swiping through the different options more often than hitting add to cart, and we thought we had some drop off in the PDP. So we engaged with our merchandising team to say, hey, is it okay if we actually hide some of the assortment options and variants we have on the product and see what that does on a small section of the product category? And found that we were potentially actually increasing confusion, increasing friction by having those other options, which then resulted in first not just changing the UX side of it, but next season not buying those additional options. So not only did we get a conversion rate increase, but also had some working capital and inventory reductions as well to drive that improvement of the organization. So somewhat counterintuitive to general retailing practices, but seemed to have a positive result.
All right, it is y'all's turn now. What questions do we have for our panelists?
Answered everything. Nice. Let's go.
Hi, Kevin Demacki, Synergistic Marketing and Media Agency. And I had a question about, you mentioned the RICE model for some of this test and learn, some of your internal decision making. So it was reach, impact, level of confidence, level of effort. Can you clarify if you're using that before you're deciding which tests to do, or is that something you're using once you do tests to determine which tests were successful, and maybe if you have any other examples of kind of how you're using that framework?
For us, it's part of the prioritization thing. Like, we don't want to launch a test that only 3 people are going to see, or that'll take more effort than the impact is going to have.
Yeah, same here. I think it's a good idea to go back and verify that your assumptions about impact and effort were accurate, but yeah, we'll typically use it during the prioritization process as we're road mapping to decide what we should test.
Ro, I've got a question for you. You run a portfolio of brands, and so how often do you find that a learning on one brand is directly extensible to another brand? Or do they operate in such distinct environments that you have to retest over and over?
More than half, I think, works across, especially when we're thinking about things like, so again, some of the tests I said have to be with how do we improve our measurement. So it's something that you should do for others. Future-proofing, again, testing new platforms. I think generally one platform will work for another, will work for the same, or technology works the same ways. I think going back to how you define the test, and often it has to be with, we shouldn't define a site test like, oh, we should add this extra button. You want to define your test as, what do we think the customer is going through as they encounter the commerce experience with us? We think they have that need, and we try to be solving that need as opposed to creating a feature. And so if you like bubble it up to that need, those needs are generally consistent across different brands, despite brand ethos or product category. How you get to actually the actualization of how that need is solved may vary, but if you're like, I try to focus a little bit higher level and let the designers and engineers get the actual kind of tactile aspect of it.
Hi, Rachel Eisen, Director of Retail Strategy at Movable Ink. One thing I wanted to touch on was the iterative nature of test and learn, especially thinking about that 6-month roadmap that you guys are planning on. How do you make sure that when there's a test, that's one of those learning tests, and as a loser, that the team doesn't just take away cool, crossed off my list, this does not work, and it maybe actually was that approach didn't work, and instead, I guess my fear is their 6-month prioritization, they get to just say, we did it, and they didn't actually try and innovate and iterate. So I guess how do you guys deal with that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's a good idea to set aside some time in the 6-month roadmap for retesting. You know that not every test is going to work on the first try, and it is very often that we'll do sort of these retesting iterations. So I think that's a good call out. I think it's a good idea to have sort of some extra bandwidth in your roadmap so that you can keep testing on that. I think it's also a good idea to set aside, before a test, have a sort of success criteria to say, this is when we feel confident that we can roll this out, or this is when we feel like this test is a win versus a loss, versus we should retest with a different strategy. So I think having specific KPIs, having thresholds, maybe sometimes you want to make sure that your KPI is stat sig, maybe sometimes you just need it to be directional, but having that set out ahead of time so that you know when it's worth investing in a retest, I think is also helpful there.
Yeah, for sure. The toughest thing I think about a test that doesn't win is, was the concept right but the execution off? And so even if and then it's were you right but early? So you're only wrong because you're early, and as we were saying, customer needs change and shift and are surprising. So maybe being wrong early means you'll be right later on.
Yeah, and I think that's where, if it's a creative forward test, then you might know that it could be the creative that's not working and not the idea. So yeah, there's certain tests where that's more of a concern than others.
Cool. All right, Daniel Rowe, thank you so much. And if you want to keep hanging out with Daniel later and talking about measurement, he will have a roundtable at noon today.